All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for clicking on the video. Today, we have the results from a poll that I had posted about a month and a half ago now. Which version of Mortal Kombat 2 do you prefer, the Super Nintendo version or the Sega Genesis version? Now, before this, I had done another poll. Which version of Mortal Kombat 1 do you prefer, Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo? We had a great turnout for that, a lot of good comments and such. A lot of good participation, so I figured, you know what, let's do another one and see what you, the viewer, think of Mortal Kombat 2 for the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis. Which one do you prefer? So you'll see the results here to your left. To your right, you will see the results. There we go. So out of 3,100 votes, almost 3,200 votes, we can see that the Super Nintendo had 70% of those votes in favor of the Super Nintendo version. So that equals about 2,200 people that participated in this poll ultimately prefer the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat 2. Now, did I know it was going to go this way? I had a feeling it would. But that's not to say that 900 people, almost 1,000 people, out of the 3,200 did vote for the Sega Genesis. Now, were these legit votes? Were some of these just people pushing, the Sega Genesis because they wanted to go against the popular majority? Who knows? Whatever the case is, we had good participation, like I said, about 300 comments. A lot of very thorough and in-depth comments, I gotta add. Which was great. I'm glad that that you, the viewer, participated in this little poll of mine. And to be honest, the votes were pretty much cast within the first week or two. So in the last few weeks that this was up, it got a few votes here and there, but nothing in comparison to when I first posted the poll. So this video is just going to be a bit of gameplay from both versions of Mortal Kombat. There were a lot of, like I said, a lot of really good comments. And it was hard for me to choose. I think I got about 15 or 16 comments in favor of the Genesis and 16 or 17 comments in favor of the Super Nintendo. So this video is just going to be gameplay from both versions while I read a lot of the comments over the video itself. So, like I said, a lot of long comments on this one, but a lot of great points. And valid reasons as to why people prefer one over the other. So that being said, let's get right into the gameplay now. Like I said, I'm going to show some footage from both videos, and I'm going to read comments that are in favor of the Genesis while showing the Genesis, and comments that are in favor of the Super Nintendo while showing that port being played. So if you clicked on the video, I do appreciate it. If you participated in the poll itself and voted, I appreciate that. And if you left comments, I read almost all of them, but it was very hard to pick out ones that I wanted to use for the video. So if your comment is in the video, then great. I do appreciate it. But you know what? That being said, let's get right into the video now and the gameplay, and let's see why Super Nintendo Mortal Kombat 2 is ultimately better than the Sega Genesis version. Thank you for watching. Let's get into that footage. Alright, so while the Sega Genesis version didn't win over the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat 2, there were still many good things to point out, many good qualities in regards to this version. So let's get into some of these comments. First thing I want to mention here, though, is the code that I'm about to put in. Left down left, right down right, left left, right right. You'll see it opens up the extra options here. Now I find these options best for free play, and for having the computer do some sort of finishing move on you if they do win. And that's basically what I just open up that options menu for. You'll see me switch it over to 6 button. That's a must for this version of Mortal Kombat 2. And then I get right into it. So let's take a look at some of these comments. The first comment comes from Buzz Clinton 2061, who says, I think Mega Drive
aka the Genesis, owned SNES on MK2. Names in the health bar are a big thing for me, which I believe was a role reversal on both consoles in MK1. Interesting that you mentioned the names in the health bar, because you know what, that tends to be one of the main points that people bring out in regards to the presentation of the Super Nintendo version. For that to make the Genesis version better for you, that's I guess, to each their own, but I don't see it being a huge deal. Regardless, thank you for that comment. All right, next up we have Titan717 says, I'm going to die on this hill. I am a big music guy, and the music sounds better on the Genesis. The Wasteland theme sounds so much better. It's damn near better than the arcades. I grew up with the Sega, and MK2 was a game I wasted hours on. I don't think it's wasted time because the game's fantastic. I had the DOS version as well, but having to type codes and use 15 floppy disks killed it. I was also like 3 or 4 for that. LMAO. Anyway, SNES had the better graphics, more sprites, animations, and sounds, but the music sucks. This game and MK3, Ultimate MK3, Sound Like a Pillow is over the speakers. Genesis will always win because of the sound quality. Gameplay-wise, they play similar enough. There really isn't lag or hindrances that impede the experience. I also want to give Genesis an edge because of the blue portal, Fergality, and the oh nasty Genesis for the win. Many good points there, my friend. You were huge on the sound department for the Genesis, in which I do agree. The soundtrack on the Sega Genesis is very cool. Thanks for that again, Titan. This next comment is from Papuna Official, who makes some good points here. He says, Sega. Thank you very much for that comment. Game Tester 110 says, Genesis port of MK2. It's missing voice samples and the endings aren't as good, but it's otherwise a faithful port of the arcade with better controls and music than the SNES title. Basically, what's more important to you, voice samples and better endings, or better gameplay and soundtrack? I'll take the great gameplay and music. Either way, you can't go wrong with the Genesis port. Game Tester likes the music and the controls better on the Genesis. And while both control very good, I gotta say, when I played through these this time, I did notice that the Super Nintendo, in my opinion, did control better. As for the music, I mean, that's just a difference of taste. It's based on opinion for this one because the music is different. So I do think the Sega Genesis has a great soundtrack for Mortal Kombat 2. Game Tester, I appreciate the comment. Doof Bay Boof. I like your name. He says, I always enjoyed the Sega Genesis sound chip over the SNES, so Genesis will always be my favorite for both MK and MK2. Basically, his choice is based on sound, prefers the Sega Genesis music and sound effects over the Super Nintendo. Thank you for your comment. Beef3344 says, I prefer the Genesis version soundtrack and atmosphere, and it's the version I grew up with, so it's Genesis for me. Although both versions are excellent, and you can't really go wrong, I just think the Genesis had a much darker feel to it that suited MK2 better than the SNES. You make a good point there, my friend. The atmosphere on the Genesis is darker, as far as I'm concerned, and Mortal Kombat 2 is a really dark game. You know, you're in the outworld, and with Shao Kahn running things, it seemed like a much darker Mortal Kombat. So I dig this comment. I really like it. Thank you for sharing that. Chain2K1 says, Genesis. It doesn't have the random slowdown of the SNES version. Sure, Jenny looks a bit trash today, but when we were playing on CRTs back, then those colored dithering patterns were hidden and gave a great sense of color. Good points here. The SNES does have some slowdown, as you'll notice once I get to the SNES playthrough, and the Genesis didn't have any of that. However, he mentions about the colors on the CRTs back in the day. On the CRTs, these games look great, so you know what? I understand, I respect your opinion, and I appreciate the comment. Toad WS85 says, the controls and game feel are just superior on the Genesis. Boom, babality. Gotta love it. Compared to the SNES, feels more weight and arcade accurate than the SNES. The SNES looks prettier, but performance-wise, taking the Genesis all day. So his his vote was based on the performance of the Sega Genesis version. I can respect that. Classic Trav MK says, I am shocked by this poll. The music on the Genesis version alone makes it better than the SNES version. The Sega official soundtrack is even better than the arcades. Now, I will say, when a game was on both Genesis and SNES, usually the SNES version was superior and better, but it's the opposite with the Mortal Kombat games. Mortal Kombat 1, 2, 3, and Ultimate MK3 on Sega is better than SNES. I'm sorry, it is. I will die on this hill. Well, I do respect your opinion, Classic Trav. Like I've mentioned already, and like I've noticed in many of the comments, a lot of people prefer the Sega Genesis soundtrack over the SNES. And you know what? Once again, I do agree that the soundtrack is awesome on the Genesis. Thank you for that comment. Diving Adventures 121 says, here's the thing. Both versions have pros and cons. In my opinion, I think it depends on what is more important to you. For example, Shao Kahn says more in the SNES version. Sound effects are closer to the arcade, like Raiden's victory stance. But when it comes down to it, for me, it's the gore. Plain and simple, blood and guts. Sega wins the column. Considering this is what the series is known for, I'd have to pick the Sega over the SNES. 32X version upgrades the audio to match the arcade more, so there's that too. Now, I'm confused here about this comment, because he says it's the gore, plain and simple, blood and guts. The thing is, Super Nintendo version had all the blood and guts, so I'm curious if perhaps you mixed up MK1 and 2 here in regards to that, and it's been a while since you played this. Diving Adventures, thank you for the comment. Alright, Metal Josh says, I gotta go with the Genesis still. I like the funky music and the weird frugality. Now, it's funny you mentioned the frugality. It's a very quick Easter egg in this game that you perform with Raiden, and it's pretty cool, I gotta say. So, the music also, I've mentioned how funky the music is. I do enjoy it thoroughly. Thank you for that comment, Metal Josh. Kexism makes some good points here. He says, in my eyes, this is really hard to call, but I'd have to say the Genesis version was better. The SNES looked and sounded more like the arcade, but the Genesis version's setbacks helped create a grungier atmosphere that I feel better suited the game. Couple that with Matt Furness's renditions of the MK2 soundtrack too, everything Matt touched turned to gold. So while he does agree that the Super Nintendo looks and sounds more like the arcade, he did like the Genesis version better because of the grungier atmosphere and for that awesome soundtrack. Thank you very much for the comment, Kex. I do appreciate it. Alright, at this point we are going to transition over into the Jade battle, followed by the Kintaro and Shao Kahn battle on the Genesis, just to take a look at what happens. As you can see here, the Jade battle is not in Goro's lair on the Sega Genesis. It is, in fact, on a blue portal stage. And I'm using Sub-Zero here because I did die several times in the playthrough for this. But like I said, as you can see, the stage itself is just a different color palette of the portal stage. And because of this, you know, some people didn't like this, some people did like it. But, you know, my preference was still the Goro stage on the Super Nintendo. And I thought that was just ultimately better. It doesn't matter what platform you're playing on, Jade is still pretty difficult in this one. Definitely faster, a lot of fans, a lot of fan throwing. So she's pretty powerful in this one. Also, they have more health. Even though the health bar is the same, you take off less health when you do damage to her. And she also, once again, jumps, or doesn't jump over, but your ice will go right through her, as well as the ground freeze. She can just walk right over it. So it looks like I'm gonna win. You know, I'm coming close, but unfortunately, as you'll see, I got my tricks working for me. Almost, doing good. I was feeling pretty confident here, but then, boom, froze me. Jade wins. Alright, the Kintaro battle. Kintaro was a menace until you knew some of the tricks and exploits. Every time he would jump like that, 90% of the time, if you weren't able to jump back and kick him, then you could attack him somehow. With Sub-Zero, you can see I do a lot of freezing. And uppercut to freeze seems to work on this version. But yeah, he definitely kept you on your toes. The battle against Kintaro on the Genesis was a fun one. And ultimately, Sub-Zero wins. You'll notice here I make a foolish mistake. Now, was it a mistake? I don't know what the heck happened there. Why there was a double ice backfire, can't tell you. But it really messed me up in that round. And so Kintaro ended up winning that one. Now the jump kick trick that works on the arcade doesn't work on the Genesis. You'll notice I keep jumping in. Now this usually triggers on the arcade. It'll trigger Kintaro doing an uppercut. And then he would fan on the uppercut, and you would hit him with your jump kick, and you could just repeat that over and over and over again. However, the Sega Genesis was different. You had to approach Kintaro differently. Anytime you were able to jump kick him, you could immediately freeze, and that would usually take. You had to be ready with Sub-Zero to freeze at any given time. Ultimately, I kick Kintaro's ass, and now we are on to Shao Kahn. So here we go, Shao Kahn on the Genesis. Basically only says one phrase. Not a lot to it. However, they do make it so that he is off of his throne, which is great, the way it should be. A lot of detail to the background, the stage. Shao Kahn's a little smaller, obviously, not a big deal though. And as you can see, the jump in and uppercut trick seems to work on him nicely. So this battle was fun on the Sega Genesis. It's always a fun battle. I don't think Shao Kahn is too difficult, which makes him a really accessible boss. Got that crazy looking SpongeBob toasty. But as you can see, his punch and his kick will just go right over you if you jump in and duck. There you go. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. So I reserved the first 10 minutes of this playthrough for some of the comments. The bottom line is the three main reasons that people liked the Sega Genesis version over the Super Nintendo version are, one, the gritty, darker graphics of this version. Two, the original soundtrack, which is incredible. It's original music for the soundtrack, and it sounds fantastic. And then three, the controls. The controls are tight on this. So how can you argue that, right? Anyways, let's move over to the winner of this poll, the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat 2, as we check out the second half of this video now.
You weak, pathetic fool. Too easy.
Such a cool intro. All you got to do is hold L and R at the title screen there, and Shao Kahn and Kintaro whoop the crap out of the Acclaim logo. Cool feature. Alright, so let's get into some of the comments as to why the Super Nintendo version is ultimately better than the Sega Genesis version. Alright, our first comment comes from Austin Willcutt 4919. He says, the SNES far superior to the Genesis version and even the PS1 and Saturn ports, because those have horrible loading times and they're missing a lot of stuff like the voices, sound, which is ironic. SNES was the closest to the arcade, especially at that time, maybe not now, and had more arcade-accurate color since the SNES could handle that better. The Genesis port was obviously rushed, as was the port of the first game to meet the deadline of Mortal Monday, I assume. The gameplay feels a bit more like the arcade as well, but the gameplay on Genesis was good too, as was the music. Both ports are very different. So, however, from this comment we can see that Austin Wilcott does prefer the SNES version. Brings out some good points. Thank you very much for the comment, Austin. The next comment comes from The Smother, who says, "My grandpa used to say keep it simple. Super Nintendo is better. Na boo boo. The Sega version sucked. Doo doo." Okay. Thank you very much for that comment. The Smother obviously prefers the SNES version for other reasons, because grandpa said so. Next up, we have at 2 Stroke Smoke 783, who says, "The weird thing is, the SNES had gorgeous-looking backgrounds but ugly, blocky sprites. The Genesis had beautiful, clean-looking sprites, but backgrounds are drab. If the SNES had the Genesis sprites, it being the best port would be undisputable." Now, that's an interesting comment, because as you can see in the gameplay video right now, on an actual CRT, the sprites are pretty darn good for the Super Nintendo. So, 2 Stroke Smoke, I invite you to play this game once again, but on a CRT. Thank you very much for the comment. At Grendal8176 says, "SNES is way better, no doubt about it." So, as you can see, Grendal, no doubt in his mind, the SNES version is better. He doesn't need a reason. He just knows that it's better. Thank you for the comment, Grendal. All right, next up from Glacius XL, we have a very long comment, but a very interesting one. It says, "I do love the Genesis version for its unique vibe and think it was a vast improvement over their attempt at MK1. But the day one purchase of zero regret was the SNES version. Even when compared to the 32X, Saturn, or PS1 versions, I think the SNES was the best. No loading, all the moves. Genesis didn't have down and low punch attacks, and it's the only port to put all the music on the correct stages. Yes, it was inferior hardware to the arcade, but it made every effort to be as good as it could be. So it felt like the best port possible, as opposed to feeling like a janky bootleg of the arcade, the Saturn. Sure, SNES wasn't 100% the arcade game, but it was about as close as you could hope for. I remember specifically being amazed by the accuracy of the fatalities, especially the animation on the Dragon Bite. Incredible. Oh, and it has 4v4 combat." All right, so Glacius nailed it there. He mentioned a lot of good things about the SNES version, and it's a very thorough comment. We can pretty much end the video here if we want, but we're not going to. We're going to read some more comments. Glacius, thank you for that one, buddy. Very, very thorough. Bucky5676 says, "Seriously, how could anyone think MK2 for Sega? Once Nintendo allowed blood, there was no contest. Heck, if MK1 would have had blood, Sega might have tapped out of the console war earlier than they did." So blood was the issue, according to Bucky, and once the SNES incorporated blood in their game, that was it. They took the cake. Thank you for the comment, Bucky. All right, as Johnny takes on Reptile in the Living Forest, Digital Worm says, "SNES, in my opinion. Now, don't get me wrong, the Sega version isn't bad, but being a little brighter, and especially the controller, in my opinion, is better in fighting games compared to the Sega 3 or 6 button pad, once again, in my opinion." Now, he claims that the Sega version isn't that bad, but the SNES being brighter and having the better layout for the controller. Apparently, that's what I'm getting from this comment. Digital Worms goes with the SNES version. Thank you for the comment. Reptile preventing my babality there. Next comment goes to Tultry P, 3685. Nintendo learned their lesson with this one, and it's almost 1-to-1 with the arcade. Sega falls short in just about every aspect in comparison. I do like how he points out that it's almost 1-to-1 with the arcade, but of course, this being a 16-bit system, they couldn't quite do that. However, the SNES version, absolutely, very, very close to the arcade. When we were young, it definitely looked closer to the arcade than the Sega Genesis version. All right, we have a novel brought to you by Dad7275. He says, I'm mixed on this one. The SNES obviously has superior looking backgrounds, but I'm not too sure about the character sprites. Now again, with the character sprites, I think if you play this on a CRT, it just, they look better. They look better than if you're playing it on a big screen. The music is a toss-up, but I think I'm going with the Genesis, even though the SNES is close to the arcade, because the job Matt did is awesome and definitely captures the feel of the game. SNES music, although good, is muffled at times. The control is nice on both, but the Genesis might have a slight edge. Might being the key word there. Missing voice samples and sound effects on the Genesis definitely hurts it, so that category goes to the SNES. I'm saying it's a hard choice and both are great, and it's going to pain me to say this because I'm a Sega guy, but overall, MK2 on the SNES, I will have to give it to the SNES, but if you asked me about Ultimate MK3, it would be a different outcome. Well, my friend, we are not talking about Ultimate MK3. You obviously gave the verdict to the SNES, and because of that, Dad, thank you very much for the comment. All right, we got a comment here, straight to the point, by Eric CCC. Says, as a Genesis fan, the SNES version is supreme. So the console wars were going on. You had your Genesis fans, your Super Nintendo fans, but even as a Genesis fan, Eric had to respect the Super Nintendo version. Great comment. I love it. Short and sweet. Thank you for that. All right, coming at you from Jeffrey Peters, 5578. He says, as an arcade purist, the SNES. But I choose Sega for the cheats, and this is the version I've grown up with. I'm totally translating this, by the way. Until later, but overall, the SNES by far is the better version. The colors pop more and don't look washed out, but I do prefer the sound of the Sega, though SNES is better. Bub something about that Sega funky sound hits me in the kid nostalgia. So he chose the SNES version. He's a little divided here, though, and I don't think your answer is quite clear enough to say the Super Nintendo overall. But because I'm reading your comment during the Super Nintendo portion of this video, Jeffrey Peters picks the Super Nintendo. Thank you for the comment. All right, coming at you from Big Peepee 3000. My goodness, I gotta be more selective about the comments I read. Anyways, Big Peepee says, SNES wins, but it was the Sega Genesis version that evoked a sense of comfort and nostalgia. My late father gifted that to my brothers and me one Christmas, and the sentimental value behind it is immeasurable. Well, nostalgia plays a huge factor in these games. I respect that you can say the SNES wins. You obviously think it's better, but I think the Genesis version has more meaning to you. I do like this comment very much. Thank you very much, Big PP 3000. I do appreciate it. Johnny Cage wins. All right, GRGMJ1980 says, if you were not around when these games debuted back in the 90s, then you shouldn't vote. I like that. I can see him pointing at you when he says that. MK2 for Genesis was good, but MK2 for the SNES was everything we wanted back in those days. Sounds, graphics, gameplay, gore, and all the content from the arcade. No question that the SNES version was on another level than the Genesis version. I absolutely agree with you, GRG. I feel the same. I feel the same about this. I was a Super Nintendo owner first and foremost, and because of that, I had the Super Nintendo version of this first, and it was everything to me. It was the arcade version for me as far as I was concerned. So, great comment. Thank you very much for that. Underwater Levels 1947 says, no brainer. Not only was the SNES version of Mortal Kombat 2 superior, but it basically won the console wars for the SNES. Nintendo dropped the pretense of being the family-friendly console and licensed violent video games, which was the winning move considering the mid-90s boom in tournament fighter video games. Killer Instinct, Primal Rage, Mortal Kombat, etc. Very, very good point here, my friend. To me, it won the console wars because of this move. It definitely made me favor the Super Nintendo over the Genesis at the time, as this was pretty much the only game I played over and over and over again once it came out. So yeah, definitely dropped that whole family-friendly vibe that they had up to that point, and yeah, released a beauty with Mortal Kombat 2. Thank you very much for the comment, Underwater Levels. I do appreciate it.
Finish it. Johnny Cage wins. Fatality.
All right, let's do a couple more comments here from my good buddy Michael Lohman 7939, also known as Mel. He says, while I really like both versions, I think overall the SNES wins, looked and played beautifully. A huge improvement over their attempt at the original MK. Plus, they broke down and included everything, all the blood and correct fatalities. The Genesis version was still great, but it lacked more colors. For example, ugly red and yellow friendship letters. Yuck. When the friendship happened in the Genesis, yes, that is one thing that I just thought, man, they should have added more color to that. It looks pretty bland. But Mel, being an absolute pro at these old school Mortal Kombat games, his opinion definitely counts in this and definitely matters. So if Mike says the SNES version is better, then I will have to agree with him, even though I already do. So he brings up some good points, and I do appreciate the comment, Mel. Thank you very much for that.
Finish it. Johnny Cage wins. Fatality.
All right, let's take a quick break from the comments here and take a look. So we saw previously the Jade battle on the Sega Genesis. While you only fought her in blue version of the Portal, you do fight her in Goro's Lair for Mortal Kombat 2, which again was the same as the arcade. This was one cool, really cool feature about the SNES version 2. Is the fact that they added this stage as well. It was cool to see it again. It looks fantastic, and fighting Jade, fighting Smoke, and fighting Noob was always a lot of fun. You can see the glowing eyes in the background too. Another little added feature that they didn't have to do, but they did. They included it because they included so much content in this version of Mortal Kombat 2. So another very cool aspect about the SNES version.
Johnny Cage wins. Round 3, fight.
All right, one last comment here from Tony P 9313. He says the SNES version is a lot better. The only thing I don't like is that they only give you 5 credits when it should have been free play. Very, very good point there, Tony. However, I don't know if you know this, but if you push left, up, right, down, left select on the character select screen, you get 29 credits, thus basically giving you infinite credits because you can put that code in anytime you play. I didn't know that back in the day. It forced me to really work the exploits out against the computer. So while it's a great code now, I didn't know it back in the day, and that did make the game a lot harder. So you made a good point, Tony. Thank you very much for that comment. All right, so thank you very much to everyone who posted comments on this poll. It was another fun one. As you can see from the comments we read during this portion of the video, a lot of good points made out about the Super Nintendo version. A couple of complaints too that I had to include just because I wanted to see the what people did fault about this version. However, it seems to be the pixelation of the graphics, which I don't really find to be true when you're playing on an actual CRT. But I mean, we all perceive things differently, and we see what we see. So. Me making that comment about perhaps playing on emulators, changing the pixelation, I mean, that's just my opinion. But overall, like the majority of people who voted, I do favor the SNES version 2. But instead of talking that while watching gameplay here, let's skip to the Kintaro and Kintaro and Shao Kahn battles, as I just lost to Shang Tsung here. And then, yeah, let's conclude the video, talk about it briefly, and conclude the video. Thank you very much for watching up to this point. I do appreciate it. Let's check these last battles out.
Round 1, fight. Round 2, fight.
So as you can see here, I am using Sub-Zero now. I lost a couple battles, and I had to continue. I've already lost the first round of Kintaro 2, but I do make a comeback here. The strategy on the Super Nintendo is a little bit different from the arcade. Doing the deep jump kick trick doesn't work. However, there is a trick you can do against Kintaro. I believe I do it in this round here, where you corner him, and then you just keep on throwing high punches. As you can see there, I dwindle him down to nothing, and I'm able to win. I do believe I pull out a win here too. Let's see what happens.
Round 3, fight.
So far, so good. I tried to corner him again by throwing just high punches. I think I do pull it off. There we go. So there you have it, the Sub-Zero exploit once again.
Is that your best?
It's funny there, Shao Kahn, is that your best? And then he shoulder charges me, and I skip to the end of that battle because, again, I lost. I do get Shang Fun for the end here. And you can see I use some Shang Fun exploits. Basically a lot of fireballs, deep jump kicks, kicks like that just to kind of dwindle them down. But Shang Fun, or Shang Tsung, whatever you want to call him, one of the easier characters to defeat Shao Kahn with. So here we go, a quick win for Shang. We put Shao Kahn to rest, we win the tournament, and there you have it. So one cool thing about the SNES version 2 is it includes the character artwork at the end during their end story if you beat the game with them. And you know, it's a little smaller, but it's still the pictures from the arcade. And because of that, you know, that was another cool feature that the Sega Genesis didn't offer. So, you know, they tried to stick as much as they could on this 16-bit cartridge for the Super Nintendo. And that's why it takes the cake, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so what do you think? Do you think the Super Nintendo deserved that win? Was it the better version of Mortal Kombat 2? Whatever your preference is, I respect all the opinions that were given, all the comments that were given, and if you left a comment, once again, even if I didn't read it, thank you very much for leaving it. I do appreciate it. There were a lot of good points, though, in favor of each, and I think ultimately the biggest issue people had with the Super Nintendo was the pixelation of the characters. It wasn't as dark as the Sega Genesis version, and I don't know. That's all I can really think of. Even after reading those comments, with the Sega Genesis, though, I mean, I've played a lot of the Sega Genesis version over the last year and a bit, and my appreciation for that version has actually gone through the roof since you know, a couple of years back, even. Playing it more, because I do appreciate the music, and it's really good. It's different, but it's still dark and pretty cool. It's kind of funky too, which I like. I'm a fan of. But the gritty graphics and the darkness of the Genesis version actually works really well with the game itself and what it is. So I do like all that. I just think the Super Nintendo version is way more polished. It's got all the backgrounds and music from the arcade, and the pixelation on the characters themselves I don't find on the CRT. I do notice it if I use an emulator on the big TV, but I didn't notice it on the tube TV. So the Super Nintendo is ultimately my favorite, and that's not to say, though, that I don't love the Sega Genesis version. So if you stuck through the entire video, if you watched it all, then I do appreciate it. Thank you very much. That being said, until next video, I am Darryl Tsung. Thank you for watching, and maybe we'll do another poll soon in regards to Mortal Kombat 3, Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo. We can do a lot of these if you know, if you enjoy this kind of video, and if you don't, I might do it anyways, because ultimately I had fun doing this. So that being said, take care, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.